Okay, I hope that my small intervention here also adds some food for thought, some positive takeaways, as well as some constraints. I think I have two minor points. So one is the set of opportunities that are available for coordination, and that is due to focused on organizational design. The second is the constraints and dilemmas involved, as already been raised by Bettina. And I will frame this into concepts of turbulence and how this causes governing dilemmas, and perhaps also incompatibilities in which solutions for some makes problems for others. So making things a bit harder. And let's it be said, I'm not a researcher on food. I also did this lecture to my PhD students this morning, but not in this. And I said to them that, well, there's a call for knowledge that we always push for, and the standard call is to make us understand better. For example, how to solve public problems in our context, how to coordinate, and particularly how to do that in times that are ridden by crisis, or in times that are turbulent, meaning that times that are more fluid, they are more difficult to govern. So this is the quite standard approach for most political scientists, at least, that is to want to understand causality when it comes to public problem solving. The second one is much less attended to, and that is, can we go a step further from our understanding and go beyond it, and try also to apply our causal understandings towards advising on how to redesign public governance. And I think that is also advisable for our discipline as well as making our discipline and our knowledge available for practitioners. And hopefully some of the things that I say here would be of that kind. So talking about books, this is the book you mentioned. So sorry for pushing books on you, but this is the book you referred to, and I think the challenges that we have on public governance, but also generally, and coordination particularly, is of several kinds. One is coordination in a multi-level structure, such as the European Union, particularly, where there's a challenge of coordination across level, as well as coordination at each level of governance. And I will try to show how this might be incompatible. There's a challenge of change and continuity. The challenge is to keep stability while at the same time reforming. I think also that was something that Bettina alluded to. But so there's perhaps a challenge to move towards some kind of resilience in times of turbulence and crisis that is dynamic. So dynamic resilience. Try and combine change and continuity. Efficiency and legitimacy is a third one, and that refers to the book I have here. That is trying to solve problems functionally, for example, during crisis, but at the same time uphold overall legitimate systems. Democratic accountability, for example. In our book, we show that the EU has been quite efficient in functional problem solving, but with democratic costs. So there's a dilemma between short-term solutions and long-term potential costs. And finally, there is a challenge of order in times of turbulence. So how to govern political orders that are inherently turbulent. Let's see if I can turbulence. What do you mean by that? We distinguish between turbulence as vis-a-vis crisis, and that is a metaphor from aviation. It's a metaphor from that we apply in social sciences sometimes, and it focuses on loosely coupled systems, decision-making situations where causal patterns are more fluid, less straightforward, say. So, but whereas much literature look at turbulence as a dysfunction, something to fix, we argue that it's a condition for public governance, particularly in a multi-level system such as the EU. As I said here, think of jazz, that is a condition for the music. So, but think of turbulence as a condition for the system to work properly and legitimately. And this is different from crisis. Crisis is something that is events that comes and go, even though they are long-term crisis. But still, we argue that turbulence is an endemic or embedded part of a system, potentially. Turbulence includes events, demands, support that are characterized by certain aspects. They are quite variable. They are typically inconsistent. They are unexpected and unpredictable. We have outlined in this book 3 types of turbulence: environmental turbulence, organized turbulence, and turbulence of scale. Environmental turbulence is the typical one, in which for a political scientist it would be the environment around states, for example, hitting states with problems. So that is what I say, the typical one. So looking at the environment as causing challenges for the organization, for the state, for example, or for the EU. The second one is more interesting, and that is what we call organized turbulence. Is often forgotten, and that is when organizations are internally turbulent. And I put up the public sector as that typical example of a turbulent system. Democracy is internally turbulent by including a lot of conflicts into parliaments and so on. So a lot of the neglect of organized turbulence, I think, is because studies of organizations are very often on private organizations, not so much on public sector organizations. And finally, turbulence of scale, which is more the most challenging one, is when problems, so solutions made by one actor causes problem for another actor. So in this respect, we can talk of a scale or a scale problematic. And in the EU, it might be that what the EU does makes challenges for what the member states does or can do. So this poses challenges for governing. It causes challenges for everyday decision making, but also challenges for doing reforms. The optimistic idea here is based on organization theory, and here I would argue that it's possible to go beyond understanding and also towards thinking about designing structures in order to coordinate, even in times of turbulence. So why this approach? Well, it's an ambition to make order out of disorder, hence focus on structure. This approach is typically neglected in a lot of social science studies. Organizations are not taken seriously in the sense that they are often seen as epiphenomena, or as symbols, or as something that is driven by environment. So the organizations as such is not focused as what we call independent variables. So it's often overlooked. A recent handbook on governance, the Oxford Handbook on Governance, did not have any chapter on organization theory, for example. And I would also argue that this approach makes political science relevant by bridging theory and practice. The model looks something like this. It's very simple. It has certain structural components as independent variables. So the organization structure of a government, the organizational demography, that is the staff composition, and the organizational locus, which is the location of institutions. Together, they might be able to explain public governance and also meta-governance. Meta-governance meaning reform. So why these variables? Why these three independent variables? Why does the causal model look like this? Well, it's we believe these variables are theoretically powerful. They are quite abstract, and therefore we can use them across time and space. So they can be applied to study the structure of a municipality and an IO. So secondly, they are empirically relevant since they have been studied. So we know quite a lot on how variation in these structural factors affect public governance processes. But most importantly, when it comes to design, it's that these variables are practically useful. So going back again, all these three variables are potential design variables. You can manipulate, not in a negative sense, but an organizational designer might manipulate and change these structures by a decision and reach certain changes on the other side. And therefore, we have then taken out organizational norms, organizational culture, because they don't fulfill the final criteria. Focus on public administration, that is essential because public administration, they contribute to order and robustness. They are quite change resistant in their structure and in how they actually operate. They provide public service delivery, they set agenda, they implement, enforce. So for example, an IO cannot do much without the secretariat of the IO. So the African Union, as was mentioned here, wouldn't work without the African Union Commission. This is the memory of the organization. Also, the public administration has this long-term perspective, and also organizes feedback loops to learn from what it does. And it also serves to uphold good governance, in the sense that it provides a potential, at least, for impartial governance based on meritocracy. That means based on the recruitment of the best people into the organization. In a multi-level setting, a theory of a multi-level governance has certain implications, and that is that it causes incompatible coordination challenges. So the short version of this is that strong coordination at one level of governance is potentially incompatible with strong coordination across levels of governance. So that's the challenge. Two forms of the multi-level administrative state. The traditional one is the Westphalian idea of the state as driven by political leadership. The administration is subordinate to that political leadership, and all foreign relationships is driven by and controlled by the political leadership. And that increases coordination of the state and within the state, but it hinders strong coordination across levels of governance. It looks something like this, with the EU Commission up there and EU agencies, and national ministries and agencies. Ultimately, in this model, national agencies are under control of the ministry. Hence, there is a strong coordination of the national agencies and national ministries. But there is very poor coordination between these national agencies and EU-level agencies, for example. They all go through the political leadership. A new model is a post-Westphalian format, which challenges national sovereignty and political control. It emphasizes administrative networks independently of political control, making the administrative networks seem autonomously. And it looks something like this, in which the governing, or let's say the coordination patterns is occurring between national agencies and EU-level bureaucracies. So in this model, you can have strong coordination across levels of governance, but at the same time, this might undermine or at least reduce the control from a ministry to the agency, because in this model, national agencies become partially agencies for the European Commission. For example, in the implementation and enforcement of EU legal acts. So this model challenges the idea of national political sovereignty. So it is somewhere between the two ideal models that often states need to live, because they live in both these worlds. So the challenge is how to combine the two. And that is not, I haven't modeled this in this model, but I think flexible structure, as Bettina was alluding to, might be such arrangements. In our terminology, it could be by establishing secondary structures or flexible collegial network arrangements, such as agency networks, which you see down here, which enables flexible arrangements of people from different levels of governance to get together. Comitology, European Commission expert groups, council working groups, all these are examples of such flexible arrangements or secondary structures that adds to this inflexible structure as you see in front of you. Just to dig a bit deeper, I'm not going far in this, but agencyfication is then, as you saw in this model, one of the key factors. And particularly at the EU level, the EU has over the years been completely dependent on national agencies in order to implement their decisions. But increasingly, the EU has established their own agencies in order to have a better control on implementation of EU acts, to have more expertise at the EU level, and so on. But there are different views on what these EU agencies are. Are they intergovernmental, nationally controlled agencies? Are they expertise bodies, such as transnational expert groups? Or are they completely absorbed by the EU as supranational units? These agencies has increased in size and increased in power and increased in number for different reasons. They are coming about in order to solve collective action problems, such as the coordination of crisis that emerges. They typically are responses to contingency events. So a lot of these agencies pop up quite soon after crisis happens, such as the pandemic now. One of the typical responses then is to either establish or strengthen, establish new agency-like bodies or strengthen existing ones. These are also fashionable organizational solutions. So agencies seems to be one of the perceived best, most appropriate organizational solutions for the EU administration. So it's not surprised that when shocks or crisis hits, the solution is often some format of an agency or strengthening of agency networks. Also, these agencies are very often evolving from pre-existing organizational formats. So these agencies don't emerge from nothing. They typically emerge from pre-existing networks, for example, of directorates, meetings, and so on. So it could be informal networks of national agencies and agency networks, directors, outside the framework of the EU. But the European Commission and the EU might then have a will to get this hub function, so to say, for these networks, and supranationalize the networks into an agency. What are the policy consequences of agencyfication of the multi-level administrative state in the EU? Well, first of all, it provides a genuine European perspective on problems and solutions. So these agencies are at the EU level, hence they are likely to look at and define and frame situations in a non-national way. Secondly, they are able to pool administrative resources that member state administrations are not do not do as easily. So they can, for example, separate, also distribute work tasks among them So the EU agency could, for example, distribute tasks between national agencies. And we have studies that, for example, of the European Union Medicine Agency showing that this agency works as a hub for national health ministry agencies and basically distribute tasks among these agencies. So that is what I define as pooling of administrative resources. But at the same time, they complicate accountability relationships by making the ultimate control, political control of agencies difficult, as shown in the model number two. Since it is, for example, for national agencies involved in such processes, for those agencies, the national minister might have not a full control or not able to coordinate perfectly what that agency is doing under the umbrella of being part of the EU agency. So some few takeaways from this, which is a kind of a combination of let's say at least 2 to 3 different research agendas, I must say, which is very difficult to compile in this short period of time. There is this challenge, and there's a structural coordination dilemma, as I've tried to show, and that is when administrative infrastructures are organized at multiple levels, and when there is a quest or urge to coordinate at each level, they can collide. So strong coordination from the ministry vis-à-vis the national agency, as well as strong coordination by the Commission vis-à-vis the same agency, can be incompatible, or at least quite difficult. I also emphasize that turbulence as a more abstract, if this is an example of turbulence, that's at least a condition for multi-level governance. So then the question is, how can we organize to live with this and cope with situations of such coordination dilemmas? And as the opportunity here, as already mentioned, is that organizational structures such as these are design elements, and there are tools available to manipulate, like as I said, and flexible arrangements such as collaborative platforms, collegial bodies. These are networks of experts and so on. These can be quite easily designed in between these levels of governance. And I think also I've then tried to make a point for focusing on an administrative turn in our understanding of multi-level crisis governance. Take administration seriously, but also their organization seriously in order to understand and design these processes. Thank you.